Out, out are the lights, out all, and over each quivering form the curtain of funeral pall comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy, man, and its hero, the conqueror worm.
Oh, no!
Oh, shit!
Is that from the Poe?
It is.
The Poe that has so much to do with what we're talking about today.
The Poe that Vincent Price reads at the beginning of the American version that has nothing to do with Poe.
Fantastic.
That's right. You are listening to another delightful episode of Loathsome Things, a horror movie podcast. As always, my name is John, and with me is my co-host Josh, who probably had an interesting week. Josh, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fantastic, John. I have jet lag. I have eschewed the normal combination of energy drink and beer. And instead, today I am rocking the combination of energy drink and energy drink.
Very nice.
Yes.
I'm drinking a tankard of coffee because I'm hungover.
Oh, yeah.
I went to the first concert I've seen since 2019, and it was great. I saw All Them Witches from Nashville, Tennessee.
Dang, plug for All Them Witches. All Them Witches, go to their Etsy store and buy their, I don't know, what do you make at an Etsy store?
I don't know if they have an Etsy store, but they definitely sell a lot of merch. They have some pretty cool, big old, like, wall hanging things that are really cool. They're a great band. Anyways, it was great to see live music again.
What was their name again?
All Them Witches.
All Them Witches. That's fantastic.
Kind of a bluesy, hard, psychedelic, indie rock. I don't know. It was packed. We went to White Oak. It's this club while I was passing through Houston, Texas, and I saw this show. Anyways, what are we doing here today, sir?
Today we're going to be reviewing a movie about people that just can't help but see all them witches wherever they go.
Them witches be everywhere.
I love that you went to see a band called All Them Witches. And then today we're going to be watching Witchfinder General. Why, this Finder General right here.
This Finder General done finded the witches.
Oh, yes. Here, all of these witches...
Witches get stitches.
Oh,
oh my God! This film is from 1968. It was made by a very young director who only made 3 feature films. His name was Michael Reeves. Michael Reeves ended up dying at 24 of a drug overdose.
Oh, shit. I didn't realize that's why his career ended at the end of this movie.
This movie took quite a toll on him, and it may well have contributed to his demise. He had a very tumultuous relationship with Vincent Price. He originally wanted Donald Pleasance to play the role of Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General.
I could see that.
Yeah, but American International Pictures, the production company and financiers, did not want Donald Pleasance, who would have been interesting in the role, but they demanded that Vincent Price go in because of the success of the Vincent Price Poe films that he was doing with Roger Corman. Thus this ridiculous conqueror worm over narration at the beginning, which really has not for a movie that has nothing to do with Poe and is actually based on a true story.
Terrifyingly
true. Matthew Hopkins, who was only about 30, I think, when this happened, is much younger than Vincent Price. He was a real person, and he was kind of a self-proclaimed Witchfinder General, responsible for over 60% of all the witch deaths in England during these crazy years.
Yeah.
It's insane.
And his career lasted 3 years.
Yeah.
He He was generally witch finding for all of 3 years, in which point he like managed to out witch murder like the entirety of England for the 160 years prior to his 3-year career.
Insane.
Yeah.
And he pretty much stuck to East Anglia, if I remember correctly. I mean, it wasn't like he was even covering the whole country, was he?
Yeah, no, he was just going after one of them little shire areas.
He basically had a little cottage industry going where he would charge, depending on how much he thought he could bilk these towns for, he would charge the whole town to clear them of witches, which he would then rape and murder and get fake confessions out of them with horrible methods that we see used in the film, and
Brutal.
some methods in the film that weren't actually used, like the scene that we'll talk about.
The dunker.
Yes. The old dunkaroo, the dunkaroo of flame, let's say.
Yeah, the original fry basket.
Did you want fried witches with that?
Jesus, yeah, this movie is brutal, and this is part of the famous the grand Trinity of early British folk horror film. And it's a doozy and completely different from the rest of the other two, and pretty much like the one that people didn't use as the format for folk horror moving forward.
That's true. It is kind of a standalone.
Yeah, it stands alone. It's pretty good. It's also kind of boring.
It does drag at times. There's a lot of, as I read on one guy's Letterboxd review, there's a lot of scenes of a guy riding on a horse.
Yes. Yeah. Lots of riding away from the camera on a horse, riding toward a camera on a horse. Also a lot of like, the reason that I thought, I didn't realize that he had died of a drug overdose. Jesus. The reason I thought that this had ended old Michael Reeves' career was it's edited together so shittily. Like the places where scenes end and the way that scenes transition is just kind of amateurish.
It really is. I mean, I guess to be fair though, I haven't actually seen any of the official cuts. I've only seen the restored version where people have like dog-eared in the cut scenes. But I can tell, I mean, you can tell when they put him in because the quality goes from bad to terrible. So I have a pretty good idea of the actual editing on the film. I mean, it's another one of these movies that looks like it was made for television. You know, it's not particularly cinematic at all.
Yeah, I actually went ahead and I watched 2 different versions of the movie because after I watched the quote export cut, aka the titty cut, I went through and watched the like more considered cinematic cut of it, and it's just the same. It's just less blurry and the audio links up better. But yeah, it I don't know, there's some shoddy workmanship going on in here. But I will say, not on the part of Vincent Price. The only thing Vincent Price is doing wrong in this movie is obviously not enjoying being in this movie.
Or obviously not British.
Yeah, that too.
That weird like American guy trying to kind of sound British, but then just giving up.
Yeah, my dear.
Exactly. My dear. Fuck it.
Would you like to come to my Gothic mansion?
He's great. I mean, his performance is really understated in this, which is kind of one of the things that saves this movie. I mean, I like this movie a lot, but I don't think it's for everybody. I mean, for one thing, it's for a movie made in 1968, it's pretty intense.
It is, yeah. That was one of the things going into this. Like, I'd heard how brutal this movie was and that Vincent Price was in it. And I was like, how are you going to have a movie that's brutal while Vincent Price is doing like smarmy smiles and a bunch of eyebrow business? And in this movie, he in fact does 0 smarmy smiles and no eyebrow business.
He's relatively subtle. Just a lot of Perhaps we should return to your chamber, whereupon I can test your witch vagina with my penis.
Yes, why don't thou get thine titties out?
Perhaps I can find the mark of the devil upon thy nipples.
Does it hurt when I poke here?
Yeah, apparently so one of the torture methods that they use is this amazing thing they called like the sticking or something, or the picking, I think they called it, which apparently was a real thing, where they had these often retractable blade knives or extremely dull knives they would use, and they would find like, marks like warts or moles or something on the person's skin where the skin was tough.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would like quote unquote stab the person, but not really stab them. And then if they didn't bleed, witch.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And if they did bleed, they would die because they got stabbed in the back like 50 times.
Yeah. I love that where he's like, "Oh, this one's hard to find."
It's just.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about this one. He's wily.
Let's see, if they don't bleed, if they don't feel pain, that means that it's a witch mark.
Yes, and of course he did use. I think he infamously used. He was one of the first. He used the famous "dunk them in the juice," and if they float, they're witch, i.e., they swim so they don't drown.
Yeah.
And if they drown, they're not a witch. Everything's kosher.
Yeah. It's funny because the on-screen like visual texture and appeal of this movie is like point for point Monty Python. Like it looks like they used the same cameras, and like there are these scenes where you've got little dudes walking around and there's a giant castle tower in the background.
Yes.
And it's just like I never realized how much of Monty Python is probably satirizing the cinematography of British movies.
Oh, absolutely.
And, and this is the missing link in my brain between the Holy Grail and the rest of British cinema.
We will continue to say "knee" unto you.
On second thought, let's not go there. 'Tis a silly place.
Some of these little teeth and little fangs.
Yeah. I mean, it was just and even the costumes. The costumes in this movie are terrible.
They look like if you grew up in the United States and you were unfortunate to have to go to elementary school during Thanksgiving, you always got these ridiculous, completely imagined versions of the Pilgrims with their buckle shoes and their goofy like knicker pants and that big like hat and all that. They're all wearing that shit in this movie.
Yep. And every once in a while, the camera gets close enough to one of the actors where you can see that their costume is just a single layer of like cotton fabric of one color that they've just stitched together shoddily, and you can just it's not high production value.
It's remarkable how far we've come in film in 50 years. I mean, in 1968, this movie was considered intense and daunting, and 2022, and a couple weeks ago I saw The Northman in the theater, and if that movie came out in 1968, it would have been apocalyptic. Like it was it's so realistic looking and feeling, and but of course we're used to that, so people can still be kind of blasé about a movie like that, especially since it's a pretty visionary film. I think the average audience member would be bored by it. But my God, I mean, we've come so far.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, if Intersect had come out in 1968, it would have been a groundbreaking triumph of cinema that we would still be talking about to this day.
Nah.
The story doesn't make sense, but damn, we don't know how they made it look so good.
I really felt the emotional impact of that character dying 12 times.
Oh man.
Nate would be lauded as a cinematic hero.
Oh my god, yeah, Nate. Like there would be like a whole genre. They'd call it the intersect genre, and like Nate would become like one of those what is it, the hero with 1,000 faces. He'd be like cited as an example.
Nate would become a trope, like in every horror film of that type, there would be a Nate.
Yeah. Just shitty time traveler coming to kill your little sister.
Hapless moron that no one likes, but he's always around.
Yeah, Captain Halitosis just getting in your face to tell you secrets.
And every movie has a scene where young Nate absolutely murderizes somebody with a big piece of wood.
Still possibly one of my favorite scenes in all of cinema. Just a little kid out of nowhere.
I paused the first time I saw it. I paused it and I was like, what the fuck just happened? Like, Nate just took a fence post and just like played baseball with that guy's head. How dare you attack my friend? He like Gallagher'd that guy's skull.
Oh, John, what would you say is, well, we'll follow this up. Let's think about this while we're going through. What would you say is the Nate pulverizing another child's skull of this movie? Don't answer now. Okay. We'll come back around to answer it at the end of El Baño. I don't know.
El Baño.
Yeah.
Well, there is an El Baño in there.
There's some baño business.
Check out my baño.
Other than, let's see, you've got your Vincent Price in here. Other than that, there is like no one. There's the main guy, Richard Marshall, is some actor guy. You don't know him, but he's in every single Michael Reeves movie, which means he's in 3 Michael Reeves movies.
He's still around. He's in movies this year. I think he's 179.
Yep, 179.
Right up there with Udo Kier, I believe.
Yes. And I liked in his credits and in several other people in here, their credits include radio plays where like they're doing like Anna Karenina and shit like that as radio plays. Like, England. Yeah.
Good old England.
Yeah, BBC.
Yeah, that guy had a lot of credits. I mean, a lot of these people had a lot of credits, none of which were particularly interesting.
Yes, a lot of people were in this show in this movie either before or after their small run appearance on Doctor Who.
Yeah, a lot of Doctor Whoing.
Yeah, a lot of British TV actors in here.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that makes sense. Television is a pretty serious. I mean, there's a lot of schlock in British TV, but it's a good place for dramatic actors to build their career because there is a very serious side to some of the British dramas. So it's a good place for them to cut their teeth.
Teeth.
Oh, teeth.
So, John, would you suggest that the average viewer, aka listener to our podcast, would watch this movie before we review it?
To be honest, I don't even know that you would necessarily have to watch this one. Of course, I would always, just as a default, say, of course, watch the movie. I mean, that's, we do this because we love watching movies, and we obviously enjoy talking about them as well. But we wouldn't be talking about them if we hadn't seen them first. Although that would be kind of interesting. And but no, I don't think you need to necessarily. I mean, this is I don't know. I mean, I'd say yes, go watch it, but if you don't want to watch it and you just want to listen to the episode, we're going to have fun talking about it.
Spoiler alert, the whole movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't want to know what happens, welcome to our podcast. I don't know. Who cares? It doesn't matter.
All right, let's dive on into this madness.
Oh yeah. Sorry. So anyways, the movie pretty much jumps right in with a hanging they're just getting ready to do a hanging. It's this dude is building a gibbet just in time for them to haul in this lady who's screaming quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
and which for me immediately I'm like, can you please just hang that lady, because I
Yeah.
don't want to listen to that anymore. Like I hope all the victims aren't this annoying, because otherwise I'm going to side with Matthew Hopkins.
Well,
But they take care of that.
yeah.
Well, a lot of them are pretty annoying. But anyway, she's screaming her lungs out. She's losing her mind. They just get the gibbet finished just in time. Meantime, the entire soundtrack is basically this. Just endless. It's like, where is all the wind? Nothing's moving. There's no wind of any kind. But I guess it's supposed to be creepy.
It's the wind of the spirit, John.
Yeah, that's right. So they noose her up. She's standing on a stool. They kick the stool out. She hangs. And we go right into some extremely dramatic credits.
Oh, man.
Very 60s-y looking. It's like, a blue background with yellow letters interspersed with these crazy, like semi-distorted black and white photos that kind of remind me of the photo montage at the end of Night of the Living Dead, which I guess was kind of a thing. They take like stills. Basically, they're like still shots of people in the movie who are in some form of agony.
Yeah.
It's kind of daunting, actually.
Yeah, it made the opening credits, more engaging. One of the things that movies have had trouble with historically is, how do we get through all of these opening credits without people wanting to leave?
yeah, that's if you walk out on the credits, that's pretty much over.
Yeah.
How was the movie? The credits were just terrible.
They were the worst credits, and it took so long. I think that's why now in the 21st century, mostly we don't get opening credits anymore.
I know, it's like it suddenly occurred to someone, why am I doing this? We don't have to do this. We're trying to tell a story. Nobody even gives a shit about credits, except the people in them.
Yeah. Assistant grip boy. What?
That's what the internet is for. They should just put a link at the end.
Yes. Yeah. QR code in the corner.
I'm sure that all the crew would be real happy about that.
Oh, yeah.
So then we get this narration, and this is the British version. I'm talking about Witchfinder General, which is really what the movie was originally called. It was marketed here as Conqueror Worm, and you can still find it under that title, but it's the Witchfinder Generals, or Witchfinder General is the name of the movie. So anyways, we get this narration here. There's none of the Poe stuff that I read at the beginning. As kind of a little bit of a brief history that it's just the mid-16th, 17th century, and Britain is in a civil war. This is during the Oliver Cromwell era. King James had written this demonology book because apparently he was obsessed with witchery, and it was a fertile environment for idiots like this Matthew Hopkins guy to kind of step in and just basically take advantage and murder and rape everyone and take everyone else's money. So this is they're talking a little bit about this. There's like the what are they call them, the Roundheads, and then there's the parliamentary forces. I think Cromwell ran the parliament, and the Roundheads were serving the king, if I remember correctly, because they're the uniformed guys. And it doesn't matter, but they explain it a little bit.
Yeah, it all went over my head because, first of all, I know absolutely nothing about this period of English history. Also, I do not care about this period of English history. Every time anyone's ever discussed it, I'm like, eh.
One of the things I remember about Cromwell was that he was particularly puritanical, but he was the idiot who tried to outlaw Christmas, and it just backfired miserably. It was kind of like our prohibition,
Yeah.
In fact, it was very much like our prohibition, where he thought it was immoral because it was basically an excuse for people to not do anything for like 3 or 4 days and just get completely shit hammered. All classes of people, nobody worked, the whole country shut down. And Cromwell was like, nope. And he outlawed it, and people did it anyway. They just literally were just like, fuck you, dude. Or they did it anyway. So apparently Oliver Cromwell was a dick.
Well, people are still fighting that battle of keeping the Christ in Christmas.
Jesus God. Keeping the Christ in the pagan holiday. So
yeah.
So basically this Matthew Hopkins guy he's kind of got this semi-sanctioned witch hunting thing going on in Eastern Anglia. And so we cut to, after this little bit, we cut to these Roundhead soldier guys. This little group of soldiers. They got their red pants and their armor, and they're ambushed in this forest by these guys that are all hiding out in the ferns.
Yeah,
there's fucking ferns everywhere.
It is fantastic, and I like that the ambush is just a single gunshot.
A single gunshot, and then the ambush, I guess, if you want to call it, is on. And Richard Marshall, who becomes kind of the hero of the movie, the hero. He's ordered by his superiors to stay behind to guard the nags, the horses, and so he hears they go on to fight. He hears this big fight going on. Eventually, he follows the battle sounds and saves the day from one of the fern raiders who he shoots. It just barely, his commanding officer almost got shot, and Richard saves the day because he's awesome. He's just awesome.
He singes his commander's sleeve.
That's right.
It just leaves a little smudge on his sleeve, and he's like, "Oh, you almost ended my career, but good job or whatever."
Hey, good job, Dickard.
Yeah. And I like that all of that, when he's listening to the battle going on, we can't tell, and that's the tension, is that he can't tell, are they winning? Are they losing? I'm just standing here, and we keep getting these shots over to the dead one, the one that they killed, one shot, one kill style,
yeah.
And he's just laying there next to all the horses, and it's just oh, this is tense, I guess. And then it's just no, it's fine.
It's really funny because it portrays England as this, at the time, as this kind of chaotic place where nobody really knew who was in charge. It depended on where you went. I mean, mid 17th century was a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago. It's just kind of crazy how hectic and disorganized things were even then. But so he takes off. He rides into this small town. I think it's called Brandonton or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
I think is an actual town. They didn't shoot it there, but he goes into the town, excuse me, and he goes to this house, and this is where the village vicar or the priest or whatever the fuck he is lives with his niece. And I think the guy's name's John, Uncle John. I don't know what the fuck they call him. John Lois.
Yeah, John Lowe's, something like
Lowe's or something. I called him Uncle Butt Sweat. So
yeah. I called him Vicar Father-in-Law.
Yeah. So he meets with Vicar Father-in-law, and he's talking to her about Sarah, who, Dickard Marshall wants to marry her. So they're talking marriage, and there's a bunch of just doodly innuendo, and, well, there are many hours for her to sleep, so she must sleep on these hours. And Richard is like, that is okay. Go take thee to bedeth while I fucketh thine nieceth. And so he's left alone with Sarah, and they play kind of these little double entendres and all this horse shit, and then all of a sudden he just grabs the candle and he's like, and now we fucketh, and they go to the chamber and have their 60s style montage sex scene where it's one shot blurs into the next and then fades into the, for about 30 or 40 seconds. That equals fucking. Mm-hmm. It's, as I called it, a lovely fuck montage. I don't think they showed no nudity really, right? Just some skin.
You can see some of her nipples upon Thames,
Nips upon Thames.
Yeah. Occasionally they will twirl around in bed, and one will just come loose out of there.
One will fall from the bed. Oh, I seem to have losteth my nipples.
Oh, let me just retract this back in.
Take thee to nipples upon Thames. Oh, the British are so cute.
Hampshire.
Fottinghamshire.
So we get a whole lot of them rolling around in the sack and doing fuck, and then it switches over. And speaking of doing fuck, enter Vincent Price as Matthew Hopkins, and he has just an adorable little wig on where it's almost shoulder length, but it curls at the bottom like a cute little girl's hair.
Everyone looks like Emo Phillips in this movie.
It's fantastic, and he is there with his jolly good right-hand man, John Stern. John Stern is his official torturer, because you see, Matthew Hopkins himself does not do the torturing. He leaves that to Stern, and they have this whole little back and forth where like Hopkins is accusing Stern of enjoying doing the torturing too much, and Stern is accusing Hopkins of loving the silver that he gets from the local magistrates too much, and it's all very and the general idea that we get is that, like, they don't super like each other, but they just get along so well. And
yeah, like Stern, who obviously enjoys the big kick for him is to be able to harm people, and they both share an interest in having sex with women, although obviously the older, I guess, in the movie, Hopkins has this impression that he's like some sort of fucking lover of women, whereas Stern fosters no illusions of that.
Yes, they're just holes on legs.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it, well, no, we'll get there.
Oh, by the way, the guy that plays John Stern, Robert Russell, that's not his voice. Later in the movie when they have the scene where they probably only put the scene so they could have that cool shot of the giant cliff face and the beach.
Yes,
which I believe is the place where they shot that show with David Tennant and what's her name? Not Doctor Who, but they may have shot that there as well.
Oh, Broadchurch.
Broadchurch. I think that's that. That looks like the same place. But I mean, most of the British coast looks like that. But anyways, that fisherman, he's the voice of John Stern.
Oh, you're shitting me.
No, isn't that weird?
That is weird. I love that fisherman, by the way. I gotta say, other than the toned down Vincent Price, the all-star cast member of this movie is any one guy that's in a scene for exactly one scene.
I know, it's true. We're gonna get to him, but I love that. Yeah.
Yes. All of these little one-off scene guys, mwah, amazing.
That's magnifique.
Oh yeah. So they get to town. They're like, oh yeah, this town has some problems. They're like what if the local priest is secretly a devil worshiper, and it turns out that the place they're going to is good old Dickhard Marshall's hometown, and that priest is his future vicar-in-law, and so they get to sticking him. They like talk to him about it, and he's like, well, I'm offended by this. Oh, and the whole town like shows up at the outskirts whenever Matthew Hopkins, and they're like, yeah, I saw it, I did. He wears devil robes, he does. He talks them gobbledygooks, he does. And they're like, oh, well, this doesn't sound like proof, but we'll get to the bottom of things.
So he breaks wind of a sulfuric nature.
And so this whole town is just like, yeah, fuck him.
Yeah, they're rough.
Yeah, it's not a good town to be the priest.
Like, you could have just hung the whole fucking town if they're selling out the vicar for being a demon.
I know, right? It seems like you've got a little bit of a problem here. But I guess they're in charge of making the accusations. The local magistrate is who can level J'accuse, and J'accuse he does, and so they accuse the priest. He's like, nah, and then they're like, oh well, too bad, and they rip the back of his shirt open. They start stabbing him in the back over and over again. Here's where we get the explanation of like what that is, and it turns out that they're just looking for that witch mark. Is it here? Ow! No. Is it here? Ow! No. Is it here? Ow! No. Well, he's the devil's really hitting it good on this guy.
It's pretty intense, that scene. I mean, it's really uncomfortable as you watch he's got like some sort. Obviously, he's using some sort of retractable prop blade so that it shows him just stabbing him in the back over and over. The blade goes all the way to the hilt.
Yeah.
He's just like jab, jab. It's so deliberate and painful.
Oh yeah, it's definitely like getting through to lungs or something. Meanwhile, Matthew Hopkins, who isn't like super into the torture itself, is just looking out the window. He sees a beautiful lass coming through the idyllic hillside, talking to a servant who we assume is telling her what happens, and she comes running this way, and he's like, And at this point, Stern is like, "What's he? It's not working. What do we do?" And he was like, "Set him to running." They just have a dude on each of his arms and force him to run around the table over and over and over again. I don't
Which
know
apparently was a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what that is, but it seems strange. Yeah, stab him in the back a bunch and then make him run.
Well, the idea was that, if you tortured him long enough, he would confess to anything.
Yeah.
Of course, he didn't.
He didn't. He stayed true to his God and Lord all the way to the end.
Which is great, because ultimately they just basically lied and said he confessed and then just killed him anyway.
Yeah, his confession was going,
I've been stabbed so many times.
At this point, Sarah arrives and she talks to Matthew Hopkins, and he is like, perhaps you could convince me of the vicar's innocence if I came to your room tonight and you could give me your full confession or whatever. And she then gets all smiley and flirtatious because she knows what's up, and she does what needs to be done to do that doing. And do it they do. And she says that he can come to her room at 8:00 and she will prove his innocence.
Yeah.
And then they do. He even comes in to her room and he's like, I'm just trying to get to the truth. And as he's saying get to the truth, he's unbuttoning the top of her various blouses.
Because, as we know, she keeps the truth inside her blouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and put that down as a rape.
Yeah, a little bit of a rape.
Yeah. So, anyways, when Stern finds out that that Hopkins has decided that he's just going to let the priest off the hook and have him off the hook from the torturing. He's going to have him jailed until the next day. And, Stern is not happy because he just wants to continue torturing the guy. So he's pissed off about that, whatever, who cares? And then Hopkins he's off on business, quote unquote.
Yeah.
He's on a truth-finding mission. And in the meantime, Stern decides that it's time to get rapey. So they're in the tavern, and he's there with one of his cohorts, and there's the topless wenches laying in their laps, and they're all pouring ale on them, and just a lot of that business going on. Stern decides it's time to get super rapey, so they're in the tavern pouring ale over half-naked women and just being lecherous and disgusting. And in the meantime, Hopkins, the business trip that he's on is, of course, going to see Sarah, and he's basically giving her the I'm cool. No, really. That kind of routine with her, and as you had mentioned, they do the do. Hopkins is trying to find the truth. He returns, finds out what Stern's been up to, and decides that, okay, all right, enough of this. It's time to torture the priest. That whole section there is just really clunky and just is kind of an example of, a young director who doesn't really know what the fuck he's doing yet.
Yeah. I mean, the rape scene is very effectively uncomfortable.
Yeah, he's definitely a talented guy. He just, as far as the flow and the timing, and I don't know what these people think as far as constraints with, well, we got to make this thing be at least 80 minutes because I think it's 80 minutes. I guess we can only put so many guy on horse running scenes in, so let's have Hopkins go back and forth on business that really doesn't make any sense. So anyways, Yeah.
I guess the implication is that since Stern raped her, that Hopkins was no longer interested, and thus it's just time to get back to torturing.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Um, so yeah, so Hopkins gets back. They bicker as they often do, and throughout the movie, um, Stern ends up following Hopkins back to the house, back to Sarah's house, and he handily placed ladder climbs to the window to spy on Hopkins and Sarah. Like, she walks up and there's just a giant ladder leaning against the house. It's great. So Stern returns to the jail. He's torturing this woman pretty mercilessly, and he Hopkins comes. He and Hopkins start discussing how Hopkins is going to leave town for a while. Again, it's just this Hopkins coming and going and coming and going, and Stern is a douche. Uh, Meanwhile, Stern ends up bum rushing Sarah.
Shara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bum rushes Sarah out in the field. She's outside. She's like out by the riverside or something. I can't remember. But anyways, he gets all rapey with her in the middle of the day. And there's this creepy part where this character sees them and just kind of walks off.
Yeah. Does a little giggle like,
yeah. Merry old England, and then walks away. And then we get more priest torture or vicar torture or whatever. They're slapping him around. Basically, he's in this like sweaty, like the jail is like every Hammer movie like basement cellar or whatever. It's big sweaty like cinder blocks and chains hanging and hay on the ground and all that shit.
Every piece of metal and stone is just stagnantly wet.
It's so wet. And then this is where they get this bullshit confession out of the priest, where he literally doesn't say anything. They just have a townsperson say, "Did he confess? Yes, he did. You witnessed it. That was a confession. Let's kill him."
Yeah. The guy's even like, I didn't hear a confession. They're like, oh, that sound he made, that was the confession. And he was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't hear a confession. Did you say confession? Guilty. And that's about all it takes.
Yep.
And it's off to the gallows. So we get to the gallows, and they do and this scene is particularly intense and a pretty famous scene. It's the old dunkaroo where they tie them up. It's the priest and two women, and they tie them up, and they go to this little bridge and they dunk them down into the river. And it's that whole thing, if they float or if they swim or sink or whatever. Well, one of them drowns, so she's cool. She's not a witch.
Yeah.
She's dead, but she's not a witch. And the other two are alive, but barely, but they're alive. And so they're hanged. And another really cool shot of them, like as the people are riding away, and you just see these two hanging from the trees. Pretty cool.
Yep.
They're just slightly swinging.
I liked Vincent Price whenever they pull him up and the one has drowned to death, and he's like, "Oh, she was innocent."
Yeah, he's so heartless. It's great.
Yeah. No one is concerned about that.
He's so blasé about everything. That's what I love about his character, because it's, as you mentioned, I mean, he's not very Vincent Pricey.
Yeah, it seems like anyone could have done this role, but it's just so good that it's him.
Yeah. Because he has such a visual, obviously, he has such a visual presence. I mean, him, Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, they all had that really strong on-screen presence.
Yep.
And those guys all knew it. All the Hammer guys and Corman and all those guys knew that. That's why they were in 8 billion movies.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyways, but I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, no, it was a great scene. The hangings in this movie are very effective. I guess I could see why 1968 people were offended by this. I know a lot of it had to be edited out for England, and then the rest of the world was like, I don't know, I want to see it.
Yeah, I think violence has always been used in films. Obviously, it's an effective reflection of things that actually go on, but it's been used in different ways. And I think once you get to 1968, which is kind of, the whole world, particularly the Western world, is in turmoil in 1968, and it's kind of marking a major transitional time and a lot of uncertainty, kind of like like the world now. And these depictions of violence are, although the film seems pretty campy now, ultimately these depictions of violence are pretty realistic. I mean, they don't, it's the violence is, they're expressing violence as something that is bad and inexcusable and very uncomfortable, and it's just a fact that you have to confront. You can't do anything about the fact that it's terrible, and you have to sit there and see it. That's a different way of portraying violence than you've seen in a lot of movies, particularly in that time period.
Yeah.
Which gives it some heft.
It is hefty. It's pretty daunting for the time. I would agree. Especially I do love the abundant use of the powdery red blood.
Yeah.
It's pretty great in here, and they just slathered it on wherever they felt like it. It's great.
It's so funny. There's a scene where this guy hits the wall bleeding and leaves this big. It looks like somebody just took a paintbrush and just with red paint just went. It's fantastic.
It's at this point in the movie that Dick Hard Marshall comes home. He finds out that everything's fucked, that the priest and one other lady have been hanged, another lady has been drowned to death, and that his beloved Sarah has been doubly raped. He decides that he swears an oath to God to do vengeance, but before he can go get that vengeance, it's time to do the right thing by the woman that he loves, and they get totally married.
Yeah, that's right. I put Dick prays for the strength to fuck up his enemies.
For God and for country. So he goes a hunting. He encounters a shepherd, and that guy tells him, "Oh yeah, they're that way." And then he totally fucks that guy's shit up, I guess. I don't know. He the guy's right up against the horse and tells him what direction to go, and then he just rides off and scatters the dude's sheep and almost clobbers him with the horse, and the guy looks off after him, spits on the ground. This is the first instance of the best character in this movie is the one guy in one scene.
It's like they plucked this guy right out of a Gold Rush movie, like a Gold Rush Western.
Yeah, he just does that one little dry onto the ground in that guy's general direction.
You better watch them sheep there, feller.
And Dickie finds his way to a bar, and we see Stern in the background carousing with some ladies, smoking his adorable itty-bitty pipe as always. Yeah. And Dick goes up to the bartender and says, "I'm looking for Matthew Hopkins." Stern sidles over and he's like, "Hey, I know Matthew Hopkins, I does. I does the sticking. He just does the finger poking." And so then we get into an entire bar brawl where we see that Dick is a total badass.
Yeah.
And just clobbers the shit out of Stern. Which is funny because at this point it just seems like Stern can't hold his own in a fight. Later we see that Stern himself is a total badass. If we'd gotten those a little bit reversed, maybe this scene would have seemed more impressive. But,
yeah.
But the only way that Stern manages to get away is the bartender out of nowhere does an old school Three Stooges clobber Dick on the back of the head with whatever happened to be around, busting it over his head. Dick goes down. Stern runs away on a horse. The bartender's even like, "You should get out of here while you can." And then this bartender that saw this guy clean house waits for Dick to get up, and then is like, "You're coming down to the local, magistrate." And Dick is like, "Nuh-uh," and clobbers this dude in the tummy, and that's the last we see of the bartender. Now we get a horse chase between Dick and Stern, but he
a really long one.
Yeah. I forget exactly how Stern managed to get away, but it wasn't very exciting. But this is when I realized what this movie was. I was expecting this to be a folk horror by way of torture porn, and it's really more of like a Zorro or like Errol Flynn as Robin Hood type of movie, but with witchcraft and more blood.
Well, yeah, and the funny thing is there's absolutely zero witchcraft of any kind.
That's true, yeah.
Nobody in the movie, as far as we know, is even remotely a witch.
Yeah, the horror elements come from the gore, come from the and the torture.
Which brings me to the point that this movie really probably is not a horror film.
Very yeah. It's kind of not, but then again, like if that's the grading criteria, then is Saw a horror film?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. For me, it's a horror film just because it's so firmly set in genre.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess it doesn't. There's nothing that's supernatural, but it is touching on that subject. It's not even necessarily saying that there is no such thing as a witch. It's basically, because that's not really what it's about. It's about, like you mentioned, the horror comes from man's ability to be so unbelievably cruel to each other just for their own personal gain.
Yeah.
Which is horrible.
It is. It's horrific even.
Whoa.
But it is. It's a interesting question as to whether or not this qualifies. I definitely think it does, but I think we can see and hear that the formula for this movie wasn't long-term successful enough to be emulated in any great way. Except, of course, there is the vengeance trope in horror, with movies like Mandy and stuff like that. So yeah. It's still there. It's just,
yeah, hills have eyes. I spit on your grave. All that.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just an unsupernatural vengeance horror action movie.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I think about like those like in Korea they have this whole subgenre of revenge movies, and I don't think anybody really categorizes those movies as. I mean, they're almost like their own little genre of revenge movies. I don't think anybody thinks of them as horror films necessarily. I never have anyway. But I mean, essentially, they're the same deal. It's just somebody gets, horribly wronged, and then the rest of the movie, the other person hunts them down and makes their life a living hell and then kills them in the end or something. I mean, it's kind of similar.
Yep, absolutely. And I think this is playing into the old style because like the main point of this movie isn't set in the scene, but then at the very end of the movie we have literally a dungeon where torture is happening, which is a very like Pit and the Pendulum and Vincent Pricey type of deal going on.
Yeah.
And it's just got like some Errol Flynn style swashbuckling mixed in there for good measure.
It really does. I mean, if you're down there and for some reason you might just need a really sharp axe, you've got one right there on the wall.
Right there on the wall. If there is a dude with a halberd blocking your path down some stairs, why just do some sword fighting and then kick him downward.
Whereupon he will spiral fall down the stairs.
Yeah, whereupon Thames.
Oh, nips upon Thames.
So at this point, somehow Stern gets away from Dick. He goes and he tells Hopkins. He's like super, super worried about it too. He's like pissing his boots about it. And Hopkins is like, no worry, man. He calls everyone man, by the way. It's very entertaining the way he calls people man.
It's so derogatory when he says it.
Yeah. Get thy upon it, man. And so he's like, look, we've got all the power. This guy's a nobody. We will get him totally killed. Don't worry, Stern. And then at this point, they're riding on a horse and they get accosted by Dick's local military buddies, and they want their horses. And they even like go into it. Stern's like, hey, we shouldn't go through there. They're gonna like fuck our shit up. And Hopkins is like, no, it's fine. And then they get in there, and indeed they're gonna fuck their shit up. But then Stern gets down off the horse, and then Hopkins gets away, and they beat up Stern. They capture him. Apparently, he's going to be a new conscript or something like that. And that's then bleeds into the next scene.
Yeah, but I like when Hopkins gets away and he's chased by the ginger Brian Jones, and he turns around and shoots his horse and gets away.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's kind of a badass in that one scene.
I was like, wait, did he shoot the guy? And then I was like, he looks fine. And then I realized, wait, he shot his horse. What an asshole. Yeah. I shall shooteth upon thine steed. So Stern is, basically just leaves Stern. But fortunately, this is where, for Stern, this is where we find out that Stern is like an ultimate badass.
Yeah, dude, he goes like crazy kung fu style on these English dudes.
That fake-voiced, pudgy, wig-wearing, pipe-smoking guy is actually a badass.
Yeah. Which would have made the previous bar brawl fight scene way more impressive if we knew that this guy could clean house like this.
It would at least make us even more impressed with Dick.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does take a shot in the arm, but that gunshot, but that didn't seem to slow him down too much.
Yeah, no, he even like as like after he gets away, he manages to have stolen a knife, and then he does like the whole like fucking like pluck the bullet out of his armhole with the knife while screaming, because that's what a man's gotta do.
It's so great because the scene, like he shows him digging in his arm, and he's like, and then the camera kind of turns away to the woods, yeah. And then you just hear, It's fucking great,
amazing.
Oh, and of course he does. We do see a scene where he jumps out of the ferns and totally shoulder murder stabs one of the red pants guys.
Yeah.
That was fucking great.
Yeah, he's just all over these guys, fucking them over in a variety of ways. He takes down like an entire squad of like inept soldiers.
Yeah, we just thought he was a pudgy rapist, but it turns out he's actually a badass.
Yeah.
A pudgy badass rapist.
A pudgy badass voiceover rapist.
So he's mad at Hopkins because Hopkins did what anyone would do, get the fuck out of there.
Yup.
He's upset. And then in the meantime, we find out that back at Roundhead headquarters, Dick has been promoted by this really pompous British guy who goes on and on about how much he likes food.
I think it's supposed to be Cromwell himself, right?
I think you're right. I think that is actually Cromwell, although he looks like that guy that's in, is it in Shrek, the British guy with the weird bob hair?
Yes.
Oh, how delightful I feel after eating a fine meal.
Nothing like victory and flatulence.
Nothing shall raiseth my mirth like overcooked bread.
Oh, it is a good day when the Lord shines victory upon the battlefield and masturbation upon thine prong.
Upon thine prong. Oh my God. So he gets promoted by Cromwell himself after a fine dinner, apparently. And he's sent off to go find the king. Don't get all revengey or anything like that last time where you went off and went rogue.
Yeah, he keeps getting in trouble for that. His captain that he saved earlier was like, look, I'm not going to get mad about you going to do a revenge, but you can't keep going to do a revenge, okay?
So then even Cromwell's like, go find the king and no revenge, and then he's off for unsanctioned revenge.
He even, at this point we enter, he has like a buddy, and he's like, all right, we're gonna go find the king, also I'm gonna get some revenge, and his buddy's like, but shouldn't you not do the revenge part?
He's like, yeah, here's the deal. It's pretty awesome.
Yes.
Dick is kind of a dick.
Yeah.
So back with Stern. Stern is nag haggling,
Hmm.
and he gets a lead on Hopkins' location from another remarkable one and done scene from this ridiculously overacting old man.
Probably the best of the one and done men, I would say. Like
He's great.
he is fantastic, and you can tell he is having a great time.
Oh my god, he can't even control himself. He's smiling so big.
Yeah, he's trying to get he wants a guinea and a half for a horse, and the guy's like 1 guinea, and he's like guinea and a quarter.
I can do this all day.
He just like starts sets up a conversation with him, and then just keeps introducing. Well, give me a guinea and a quarter, then.
What, a guinea and 3/4 of a quarter? That guy is great. He needs his own movie.
Yeah, that guy. He's probably like on every other episode of Blackadder or something like that.
He's the guy everyone waits to see.
Yeah,
There he is.
He's probably the guy that drives the 3-wheel car on Mr. Bean.
That's fantastic. So then this is where we get the lovely cliffside scene where it's this beautiful beat. We get a shot of the ocean, and then the camera pans over, and Dick and his boys are talking to this fisherman, the guy who does the voice for Stern, and
That's so weird.
it's so weird. And he basically tells them that there's going to be a full scale witch burning going on, and so yeah, these guys bail. They're like heading to town.
What? Not until like for the reason they're talking to him is he's the one that like let the king escape.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. He ferried the king across to France in his little fishing boat, and they're like, dude, there's like a war on, and this guy came and he's like the king, and you just weren't concerned about it. I love his responses. It's like, oh, there's a war on?
That's right. I just live out here. I don't know what the fuck's going on.
Yeah, someone probably should have told me.
I didn't know. I was just skiffing the king across the channel. What the fuck did I know?
And so this is the point at which Dick has to decide between following the king to France or going to the nearby town where a full-scale witch burning occurs.
Yeah, tough choice. He's going to the witch burning.
Right on into the witch burn town.
Fuck the king.
Yeah.
Super British of him. So in the town, we see Hopkins' goons, and they're utilizing this amazing like fancy ladder drop down Bernie method that basically they like hoist the quote unquote witch way up onto this thing up on a ladder, and then they lower it into a bonfire and just dip them into the fire. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's a great little invention. I suppose this is the one you were saying didn't really exist.
Yes.
Yeah.
That British apparently didn't. Like apparently the rest of Europe's torture methods were really, really rough, and they included things more like this. But in Britain, they were really known for the dunky and the picky.
Yeah.
But what I love about this scene, besides the shot where they dip her into the fire, which is fucking amazing, is the townsfolk. It's very much like The Lottery, where it's all these short story, The Lottery, where it's all these people that are just supposed to be like small town people, but they're super leering and like just gawking, and it shows the children smiling as they watch, and it's just this publicly sanctioned murder, and all the people are loving it. It's like their entertainment for the year or something.
Yeah. It's a grand day to watch this friend and fellow towns member be make toward like killed in a way that makes sure that she gets to feel the fire burn her face before her nervous system overloads.
And it's just horrible. And just in case you didn't understand the implication of showing happy children, you see them cooking potatoes in the cinders of the fire.
Yeah.
which was amazing.
Yeah.
And
That was
pretty horror movie-ish there.
yeah, yeah. They were just having a good time afterwards, roasting some potatoes in the embers of her demise.
And then, in the meantime, Hopkins gets paid.
Yeah, yeah, he's counting his silver. We see also that it was like this particular witch was some young woman, and we see like the husband being restrained in the crowd but being forced to like watch her be burned to death. And he comes back into play later in this movie in like the action sequence for a mere moment. But also like another horror movie scene is like we see her getting burnt to death. The like we see her being lowered down, and we see like her face resisting, and then the camera switches to a long shot where you know it's obviously like a puppet, or not puppet, but you know, just like a mannequin up there or whatever, but we see like the whole body getting engulfed in flames as it's being lowered down, and it's woof, it's rough.
Yeah, it's pretty effective. It's not like Beyond the Door 3. I mean, yeah, Beyond the Door 3 where somehow the kid in the shack just magically turns into a mannequin.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they do a better job than that much later, like that 20 years later movie did.
Oh my god.
At this point, Stern shows up. He finds Hopkins is there, and he's like, "Oh, look here, I want to get my vengeance." And Hopkins is like, "Hey, but I just got paid, and some of this money is yours. I've been keeping your pay from all my other jobs set aside, so here's all of your money." And Stern is like, "Oh, okay, we're friends again. Good."
Yeah, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah. So it's just like that. They're fine again. All of that vengeance energy that he had stored up just gone.
Yeah, as soon as he realized that they could continue to have a mutually beneficial arrangement, then that's all that mattered to him anyway.
Yeah. Which, like, at first when I saw it, I was like, "Oh, so that whole like arc of the movie is just pointless." And then I was like, "Oh no, it's really emphasizing how much of a shitty motherfucker these guys are."
Yeah, they have no morals whatsoever. I mean,
Nope.
they all they care about is their own ass.
Yep. Yeah, not even no pride, no like like, "Oh,
No.
I'm gonna get you for what you did to me." No, just like, "Oh yeah, but money. Cool. Let's
Yeah.
go."
Yeah, because it's not even that he doesn't like these people; he just doesn't care about anybody at all,
Yeah, and
or both of them.
then within just moments, he like spots Sarah in the crowd, and he's like, "Hey, Hopkins, look, there's her." And they realize that if she's there, then Dick must also be nearby, which does not make sense. First of all, why the fuck is she in this town?
Yeah, she just went incognito, and they just happened to spot her. I mean, how many fucking towns are in this place? There's got to be tons of them.
Yeah, and like you would think like she like the witch burning already happened in her town. Like she I guess maybe her town wasn't a great place to be after the villagers had her like caretaker hanged for witchcraft. Maybe it wasn't a great place to hang around, I guess.
I mean, I guess, but what, where was she going to go in this town? Like a total stranger just lurking the streets during a time where the town's just looking for people to hang so they can,
Yep,
like,
strange women enter the town right before they discover witches, and she's not one of them.
Yeah. But fortunately for Hopkins and Stern, she's really bad at hiding.
Yeah. Like, I'm gonna hide in this obviously the least dingy clothes in the whole village.
this bright blue like cape thing.
Yeah, the princess of the town incognito.
They're like, well, if only we could find. Oh, there she is.
Oh, yep, that's her.
And on with the movie.
So they devise a plan, because if she's there, then Dick must be there too. And like Stern is still like shitting his pants about how scary Dick is. And so Hopkins is like, you see, we'll get the town on our side. We'll just explain to the local magistrate that they are witches, and then whenever they come around, we will do a witch finding upon them. And they're like, oh, okay. And so sure enough, Dick shows up, Dick and Sarah in their room together, and someone knocks at the door, and so Dick goes to the door with a sword, opens the door wide, and there is Matthew Hopkins with a pistol leveled at his chest. Ha! He has been outmaneuvered. And now they are instantly accused of witchcraft, brought to a dungeon, and tortured to get them to confess to witchcraft.
Yep. Lower your rapier, you twisted piece of garbage, or whatever the hell he says.
Something akin to that. And so his masterful plan of answering the door with a sword is foiled. Get it?
And it's okay because we introduce another Deus Ex Machina that doesn't really work, the blue suit guy.
Yeah, the blue suit guy, the boyfriend from earlier. How does he figure into this? I don't remember.
He's a royalist sympathizer, but how he really fits in doesn't really make any sense. Like he's just a plot device, but a really badly placed one.
He tells the boys in red about what's going on.
Yeah, like they kill him, but before he dies, he lives just long enough to leave red paint everywhere and then tell the red pants guy what's going on, saves the day.
Yeah, so he tells them about Dick Hard Marshall and Sarah and how they are being tortured for witchcraft. And so it's just Dick's military buddies. They come in, this is the scene where we see them climbing over a hill towards the tower looming in the background, and it looks like a Monty Python scene. And then they are fighting their way down the stairs into the dungeon while that freaks Stern out. Stern is like, oh shit, they're coming. What do we fucking do? And Matthew Huck is like, it's okay, dude. Just hang on. And so they split up and fights are going on everywhere. Somewhere in here, Dick gets himself released from the chains or whatever, and he does a really awesome fight scene. He beats the shit out of Stern and gets Stern on the ground, and then shoves the heel of his boot into Stern's eye socket, just leaving it a pasty, bloody mess. And
it's so great. He heel stomps his eye socket. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
and don't forget they did the stabby on Sarah, so she's not in good shape.
Yeah, they've been stabbing Sarah's back. She's tied down and screaming during all of this. They were going to be branding the cross into her, like the brand was inches away from her skin when everything went to shit for them.
Yeah. Oh, that would have been great.
Oh, this is gonna look so sick once it heals up.
It's okay, because what comes next is one of the greatest scenes in movie history.
I fucking love it. So Dick finishes crushing Stern's eyeball to death. And then fucking Hopkins is there, and Dick just grabs an axe off of the wall and chops Matthew Hopkins to pieces. Like, we see one axe in and it's bloody, and then two, and then they ran out of fake blood. So we just see him hitting Matthew Hopkins with an axe in the cape over and over and over again and freaking out. By this time, the military buddies make it all the way to the bottom of the stairs. They see their friend Dick making chopped barbecue out of the Witchfinder general. One of them takes out his pistol and makes sure that Matthew Hopkins is all the way dead for good. And Dick looks up, holding the axe, rage filling his entire face with very dramatic acting, and he says, "You took him from me!" And then we just get Sarah screaming over and over and over again.
through about 30 seconds of the credits.
Yep, another one where like either screaming or laughter goes through the credits.
The third movie that we've reviewed that does that.
The second movie that we've released an episode of that does that.
But by the way, I like that, as you say, they ran out of the fake blood when he's hacking the living fuck out of Hopkins. And it even looks like they're using real blood. And when he's swinging that, it's like full over the head, double arm as hard as he can, just burying the axe into this dude over and over. It's amazing.
It is great and brutal and vicious. Yeah, it's not any of that like stage swordplay style stuff. He is just splitting some wood onto Vincent Price's ribs.
I love how it just ends in complete abject madness.
Yeah. Yeah.
She screams us into the credits. There's no hope of anything good happening in this world.
No, this world is full of shit, and there's probably no way it's going to end good for them because they killed the Witchfinder while being subjected to questioning for possibly being witches.
Yeah, and like the odds of her surviving being stabbed in the back 800 times are pretty low.
Yeah.
And the odds of him probably getting like the Bernie dip is probably high.
I mean, at this point, like, we don't know. It kind of looks like he's going to go after his buddies and do a chop on them.
Yeah.
Like, he's not left in a good mental place, let's say.
Let's just say sequel.
Witchfinder Witchfinder specific.
Witchfinder 2, Electric Stabaloo.
Oh, shit.
Directed by the guy who made The Sadness.
Oh my god, The Sadness. Talking about it, I realized that I enjoyed this movie more than I felt like I did when I was watching it by myself.
It's funny because the first time I watched it, it wasn't, it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought there would be like some sort of, maybe a hint that there was witchcraft, or, that there might be like some double turn where, this guy's obviously doesn't even believe in it. He's just killing people, or whether he believes in it or not, it doesn't really matter. He's just killing people because he's opportunistic. And it would have been cool if there actually was some kind of witch twist or something, but I don't know what exactly I was expecting, but it was so dark, and, just it ultimately was pretty transgressive that I didn't really enjoy watching it so much. But as soon as it was over and I was thinking about it, there was so much that I liked about it, and it's kind of it grew on me. And watching it again now, knowing what was going to happen and stuff, I liked it a lot more.
Yeah, I also think, like I mentioned, I have jet lag, and I watched it for the first time with jet lag, and I watched it a second time with jet lag, and so that probably like purpled it a little bit to me.
I could see that, yeah, no doubt.
I was like, what's happening? Is this movie bad, or am I bad at watching movies?
Right.
But no, yeah, it, like, the things that it does well, it does super well. Just some of the things that it doesn't do well, it does horrifically bad. But
yeah,
I actually go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's one of. I mean, we're so spoiled now because there's so many great horror movies where, in comparison to movies like this, it's really hard to find something wrong with them. But you can, and it no movie's perfect, and no viewing experience is perfect, and there's all kinds of things that are going to, but if you're talking about overall visual quality, clarity, what's the word, like flow, editing flow, storytelling. I mean, movies now are just light years ahead of movies like this.
Yeah, that's true.
Even though it really does have its charm, I will say that this movie does not have a lot of charm. It's really just the darkness that carries it through, because it's really dark.
It is exceptionally dark. I actually appreciate that there is no element of the supernatural in this, that it is just fully leaning on the source of horror being human nature and the excesses of our capacity to visit horror upon one another, which I guess is kind of the general theme of torture porn in general.
Right.
and I don't know how much that was explored before this movie, but it's pretty good, I guess. That's pretty
Yeah,
rad.
I can't imagine it was much of a thing. I mean, it's interesting because, as you had mentioned, this film is part of the kind of the unholy trinity of folk horror films. But the one of the things that's interesting about this film compared to, say, Wicker Man, or the what is it, Devil's Claw? Is that what it's called?
The Blood on Satan's Claw.
A Blood on Satan's Claw. That's right. Which Blood on Satan's Claw, when you watch it, it has more in common visually and just kind of stylistically with this movie. But then obviously it's much more supernatural than, well, even than Wicker Man for that matter. Uh,
Yeah.
but of the three, it's hard for me to say because Wicker Man is, Wicker Man is a fucking musical, and I still love it, and it definitely has
Yes.
its issues, but it's light years ahead of, as far as cinema, and it's light years ahead of these two movies. But at the same time, in if you watch the documentary Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, which is a really long 3 hour plus documentary about folk horror and kind of its impact on cinema globally, then you can really kind of understand the place that a movie like Witchfinder General holds in that kind of like little weird subgenre, because folk horror doesn't necessarily have to, cover issues like actual supernatural stuff. I mean, this is the darkness that you find in rural England during, the 17th century, where these superstitions were rampant and people were really, these crazy ideas like witchcraft just basically took over Europe. It was like this fad, and, God, countless people died because of this stupid concept. I mean, it's it's really bizarre, but it really does fit in with the folk horror thing. It doesn't have to necessarily be a supernatural in nature. It can be, you know, people are, this is when people were living in a world where the world itself was like a supernatural thing for everybody. And so, it was easy to fear something like a witch. If enough people were telling you that they were out there, it probably wasn't that hard to believe them. I mean, shit, people do that shit now. So
Yeah, I mean, we definitely don't live in the state of Texas where the government has put a $10,000 bounty on to reward people for turning in suspected abortionists.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, we absolutely do not live in the state of Texas in the United States, where the governor, Greg Abbott, is a complete bucket of human fecal matter.
Yeah, yeah. And the lieutenant governor, who is like a weird, like, Christian dominionist that thinks that he's more of a Lieutenant Christ than a lieutenant governor.
And the cockeyed attorney general,
Oh, no.
who has, as Bill Hicks referred to him, referred not to him but to Jesse Helms, probably has the husks of dried children hanging in his attic.
Definitely some husks in that attic, yes.
And we don't know about any of these people because we don't live in the state of Texas.
Nope, not Texans, we.
No.
No.
So that's a nice parallel between 50 years ago and today, where we're living in a weird Puritan. I mean, let's be real. The United States was formed by fucking Puritans. And
Oh, yeah. Creepy, creepy Puritans.
that violence is great, sex is very, very bad mentality is absolutely prevalent in this country, very much so.
Yeah.
Promiscuity, even though it's kind of encouraged for young men, and obviously very much considered a mark of evil for women, is still kind of looked at as something that's dirty and bad in this country. It's ridiculous.
It's fucked up. It's super fucked up. And that's part of what makes me like appreciate this movie is like one of the things that's always bothered me, well, not always bothered me. One of the things that has recently started to bother me about the entire folk horror genre is that it's an entire horror movie movement that's dedicated to how things will be bad for you the instant you step out of line, outside of the boundaries of Christendom, you know?
Yeah, which was one of the cool parts about the documentary was that they covered parts of the world where Christendom has nothing to do with these stories.
Yes.
So you get these myths that are have prevailed throughout centuries in cultures that I guess ultimately probably haven't changed that much. I mean, they probably have changed in certain ways. It's you know, cell phones are pretty much a global thing, even in rural areas now. Uh, Even in poverty-stricken places like India, everybody has a cell phone. Yeah, they may have nothing else, but they have a cell phone.
Yep. Yeah, they can at
Uh,
least FaceTime.
yeah, so the world has changed in that respect, but these myths have very much carried on, and I think people entertain them even if they don't necessarily believe them because it's some sort of a tie. It's a link to their history or their cultural history or whatever, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, even in Hong Kong cinema, there was a whole kind of folk horror movement called Don't Go to Thailand, which is probably very racist.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But it was basically like, oh yeah, if you go to Thailand, you're gonna get fucked up by like the local, magic nonsense.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's all kinds of that crazy shit, and people were it was a way to control people. Maybe
Yeah.
like in these countries where there was a monarchy or there was some sort of military based governing body. They would control people through fear. It was a lot easier than controlling them by force.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't take your crops across the border because the people that live over there have evil demons that prey on our people.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, fuck that. I'm not going to test that theory.
Nope. I'm gonna stay here and be a good docile citizen.
I'm going to stay here with lots of crops.
Yeah, all my crops and guns.
And I will say this about the folk horror thing. I I do like the subgenre, but I also think that it's a little bit of a like a red herring kind of thing because it's it I understand that genre stuff and a lot of times things get named just because it helps people understand them more often than not in entertainment business. Something gets named because it's a way to market it. Um, I think the folk horror thing is definitely a combination of both because if you really strip it down, sometimes there's nothing there.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a way of describing films that are different than standard horror fare. But you can include anything in fucking folk horror if you want to. I mean, Candyman is folk horror, and
Yeah.
I mean, it just goes on and on. It's like, yeah, but nobody's setting out necessarily to make 90% of this shit. Nobody probably ever said the phrase folk horror once while they were conjuring up the story and getting funding and making the movie and hiring. And it's just a scary movie.
Yeah, it's interesting. That was one of my big takeaways from watching that like 3 hour long documentary was that you could really just lump anything into folk horror.
Yeah, it was a cool way to draw in things that I certainly knew nothing about, like a lot of movies that I was unfamiliar with, and so it was a nice way of kind of making a list of cool stuff I wanted to check out. But
Yes.
it wasn't necessarily under the auspices of it being a folk horror per se. I mean, to me, folk horror. To me personally, when I think of folk horror, I think of Wicker Man. I honestly don't think of this movie or even Blood on Devil's Claw. Like it's. I mean, I guess that kind of fits in, but to me, that's just a supernatural, like goofy demon movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't feel like I don't know that it was. I mean, I wasn't there when it came out, and I wasn't aware of what films were out and what kind of genre films people were into or whatever. So I don't understand maybe the place that film had in particularly British culture when it came out because I just don't know. Maybe that would have made more sense at the time, that you would have been like, oh, well, this is different. This is a nasty piece of work or whatever.
I guess part of the idea with folk horror is that you're dealing with folk religions where it's like not a religion that's not bound by like a external governing body. It's just like a small coven of religious zealotry. And
Right.
if that is a definition of it, then I could see how Witchfinder General would fit in because of Matthew Hopkins's unique little extremist cult of non-conforming religious nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah. These kinds of discussions are always interesting because you get them, you get into these same discussions with like music where, there's certain genres in music, like say the grunge thing where all these bands, come from a particular region for the most part, and they all get lumped into this thing that none of them associated themselves with.
Yep.
But at the same time, the label and a lot of the ideas attached to calling them grunge bands is kind of works. I mean, it's marketable and all that kind of stuff, but as far as a descriptor, which is what people need to understand things, it works. It's not as clunky as some of the other descriptors out there. It's not as dead on as maybe say hair metal, which is a perfect descriptor for that type of music, or you know
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of there's a lot of subgenres out there that are kind of weak, where you're like, well, okay, you call it this, but everyone that's under that umbrella hates that term. So I don't what's going on.
Yeah, like post-punk is one of the single worst music descriptors. But I get the value of things like that whenever you consider that like most bands, and even most bands album to album, aren't adhering strictly to one of these labels, and that really what you're doing is you're tagging bands with a variety of sound styles and influences, where like each band is going to be like a mishmash of like 3 or 4 or more different things all put together.
Yeah, to me, a folk horror movie. The reason why I like The Wicker Man as something that I think of as folk horror is because for me it fits into this idea that here's this ancient belief system. These people live on this little island, and they've practiced this crazy fertility belief system, for centuries. And here comes this Christian guy, or he's obviously a representation of Christianity, or
such a good Christian boy.
Yeah, just the regular mainstream world, who comes over and finds himself balls deep in something that he doesn't understand. He's terrified of it. He has the bottom hand, I guess you'd say. They have the upper hand the whole time. This guy, I mean, they manipulate him and play him, and long like this guy's fucked from the first moment that you start watching the movie, but you don't realize how fucked he is until later, and how utterly and completely screwed he is the second he sets foot on Summer Isle. And that all of these people believe in this thing, which doesn't even necessarily have to be a real thing. It's just something that they believe. And just the fact that they believe that is kind of crazy, but then what they are willing to do in order to justify, having the crops return it's not that uncommon. People have been doing that shit forever.
Yeah, and not just willing to do, but like are enthusiastic and like anticipating the doing of it. Like one of the things that makes that movie so much more daunting on the second watch through is you realize it's not just that he's fucked from the second he steps foot on the aisle, it's that everyone sees him and they are excited that he's here. Look, there he is. Oh boy, this is going to be great.
Yeah, and it completely flips the idea of who the protagonist and the antagonist is, because obviously the entire place is antagonistic towards this guy, but I don't relate to him very well.
No.
I mean, I don't dance around fires with naked ladies, although I wouldn't mind doing that. But I mean, I don't do that, and I don't worship rabbits as a fertility symbol, although I like that kind of symbolism. I think it's fascinating to me because it draws parallels to the natural world, which is something that we've kind of lost touch with, which I think is actually kind of important. So I actually associate and like myself with those people in a weird way, even though I'm kind of scared by them.
Yeah, exactly. Part of that fear is like that. I guess unless unless you do identify with the ultra Christian police officer, then if you don't identify with that, you're identifying with these other people, and you're scared of the extreme of that.
Yeah, like I like and one of the things that's smart about that movie, which I don't know if they did it on purpose, I hope they did, but he's portrayed he's obviously portrayed as very Christian and he's a cop and he's he represents all those kinds of things, but at the same time he's not an asshole.
Yeah.
I mean, he's actually a pretty decent guy, and obviously he's just doing his job. But at the same time, he is actually concerned for the well being of this girl.
That's true. He's trying to save a endangered child, which you're like, oh, okay, yeah,
And you're
that's
like, oh, these people, they don't even care. They know what happened to her, and they don't even care. So you're at first you're like, these people are terrible. But then at the end of the movie, you're like, you kind of realize, well, I mean, they spent their whole lives there. What they're doing is completely sensible to them.
Yep. Yep. This is what we do. I will say, like, at that point, like at the big reveal, I'm like, oh no, they're gonna burn those chickens too.
I know. I'm like, what did that chicken
Oh
steal?
no, why? You need those. Your crops are bad.
Exactly. Just you need to have like a hatch or something so that right when they cook, you just whip them right out of there.
Yeah. Oh, it's a Boston market, and it'll appease the gods.
Ah, that poor chicken boy. Fear makes the meat taste better, doesn't it?
John, if you had to give this movie, and by this movie I mean Witchfinder General, not others, a Loathsome Things rating on a scale of 0 to 5 Loathsome Things, how would you rate it, and why would you rate it that way?
I had a tough time rating this one because I changed my rating several times. I went back and forth, and usually I try to just kind of go with my gut on a rating because I feel like that's going to be about as honest as I can get. But I've thought about the fact that you kind of have different criteria, and so I was a little bit arbitrary about it, but I decided to kind of use different criteria. Like, for instance, did I really even think of this as a horror film? Which I guess I did ultimately, but you know,
Yes,
I know,
kinda.
I definitely have issues with it. I mean, it's very amateurishly made, uh, but it also has a very, you know, it has a strong impact with a lot of the thematic stuff, and some of the visuals are pretty intense. But overall, it's not a very pretty movie. It's really clunky. It definitely has its problems. So I mean, I went around the block with the rating. So I just said, I'm just going to give it a straight 3 out of 5. Um, I because if I didn't enjoy watching it as much as I did, especially the second time that I've watched, and then I've seen it more now, uh, um, but as I had described earlier, my response to seeing it the first time, but from the second time on, I've enjoyed watching it a lot more. Otherwise, I probably would have given it like right at a 2.5, just like right in between, because but I liked it enough that I think I'll go with a 3. Anyways, how about you?
That's funny. I also gave it exactly a 3. I played with increasing that score and I also like originally had it at like a 2.7, and then as we were talking about it I was like, no, this one actually goes a tick up, this one goes a tick up, and I got to a 3. It's I would say it almost fully qualifies as a horror movie, but in that old style way, like in the old horror movies where like it was a horror movie because it was set in a castle and there was a skeleton, more so than what we would you know post Night of the Living Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, what we would now consider as a horror movie. It was more like a properly a horror movie of the before times.
Yeah.
But it was the parts that were enjoyable I enjoyed fully. It was just like you said, all put together, it was kind of a mess. There was a lot of technical film problems that just weren't done well. That's why I wanted to go ahead and watch the other version to make sure, like in the export cut there, even like when they were cutting stuff in, you could see that like there were like blurs around the parts that they were adding in because the editing was just not there for it.
Right.
So I watched the other one to see how it was put together properly, and it's just it the it it was never good, a never properly produced movie from the beginning, it seems. So, but highly enjoyable. I love its unique take on the, or I guess its unique influence on the folk horror subgenre. I kind of even like the fact that it's like a withered branch on that family tree, where we more see it now as like if you were analyzing vengeance horror, you would go back to this movie, whereas you would only really talk about it as a folk horror whenever you're talking about like the deep roots and those first instances. It doesn't really have a lineage running through there, but you can see it in things like Mandy and other like action horror movies like that. Like you said, what is it, like Day of the Woman, and it's called I Spit on Your Grave. That's right.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's great. It's worth watching. Just don't don't lean your entire being into the idea that this is going to be a great movie or great to watch all of the time. It's really one of those movies where it has a great payoff at the towards the end, and everything up to that is kind of clunky. A lot of it felt summarized, like whenever, like the way that the scenes were transitioning, you could tell that we were just like hitting story points
Yeah.
without really much concern for telling a story.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's definitely an art to storytelling. If you've ever, been an unfortunate child who's like at a day camp and they have a storyteller there, some people are actually really good at that, and it's like an art form when it's done right. There's a way to tell a story and make it interesting from beginning to end, and keep the, in this case, viewer engaged. And this film doesn't tell a story very well, to be fair. I mean, it really doesn't. Um, it's pretty rote, but it is firmly a genre film, partially because of reasons like that. I mean, it's very much a genre film in that it's going to explore things like cruelty and violence that a regular film would would be much more expositional about. And like, you'd have these long scenes where people are agonizing over the meaning of this or that or whatever. In a genre film, they just fucking do it and let you figure it out.
Yeah.
So in that respect, it's definitely a genre film. If you're going to pick what genre, maybe you could say horror revenge almost, or a horror revenge period piece.
Oh, costume horror.
Yeah, it's a little weird if you really start to strip it apart. But ultimately, I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to talk about. I will say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun to pick apart. It was weird. It's a weird choice for our first Vincent Price movie, because
Yeah,
it's just so outside of the typical Vincent Price delivery. Like here we see his skill as an actor, but we're not really getting the Vincent Price charm. We're
right.
just getting the visage of him on the screen, and we're watching and waiting for him to do the things that he never does in this movie.
He very much has a visual presence you know, when he retires, or he's about to retire to the bedchamber with Sarah, and you know that they're going to have sex. It's part of the reason why it's so uncomfortable is because it really feels weird seeing Vincent Price in that position. There's such a formality to Vincent Price's film presence. The idea that he would even take his fucking pants off just seems strange.
Yes. And then later in the movie, he's in that other town, and the magistrate is like, yeah, there's three of them, and he's like, and tell me about them. He's like, well, there are two young ones and an old one. He was like, oh, bring me the two young ones, bring them here. And he starts unbuttoning. He's like, and what about the old one? He's like, oh, they're more practical. The young ones will take more time, you see. And he's just like taking his clothes off and beginning to like dick out lounge on the bed, get ready for these two young witches to come to his bedchamber. And it's just like, ugh.
Yeah, lasciviousness is not something that you associate with him, and seeing it is very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
which is cool. I mean, I know that he actually, uh, apparently, even before they really finished working on this film, he and the director kind of worked out some sort of begrudging respect for one another. And I think over time, Vincent kind of admitted that this was one of his favorite films that he made.
Nice.
He actually was kind of proud of his performance.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, he did a great job. It was just, it's so outside of what you expect from him that it's shocking.
It is shocking. I mean, Vincent Price is one of those actors. It's like, I mean, I I don't know. I've never met anybody in my life that is even remotely like Vincent Price,
Yeah.
and probably everyone I know would say the same thing. I mean, he's just, that guy was built to be on a movie screen. He just doesn't fit in the real world at all. I can't see him like, I would like to have a smoothie, please.
Yes. And you mentioned like his contemporaries. You've got Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing and all of the horror movie greats. I've got to say, he is like, they're all of level, but he is just a step above everything else. Like, I love Christopher Lee. I love Boris Karloff. All of the greats. They're all fantastic. But he is just, I guess it's because he was such a crossover hit too, that while he was like the king of horror movies, he was also just doing stuff fucking everywhere.
Mm-hmm. He liked heavy metal.
Yeah, Christopher Lee also famously liked heavy metal.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I guess it was Christopher Lee.
Yeah. But like he had a Muppet on Sesame Street after him, Vincent Twice.
Amazing.
And I mean, this movie came towards the end of his third decade as the king of horror, and he went on for 2 more decades. His first horror movie was 1940. His last horror movie was 1990, and this came out in 1968. It's just, he's such a fucking badass, and his screen presence is just out of the water. It's crazy for who he was and what he was, and then this movie is just so different from everything else.
Yeah, he's absolutely inexcusably horrible, especially when you realize that he's actually kind of, one of the things I did like about his performance, I forgot to mention earlier, is that he's clearly a little bit sweet on Sarah, and to the point where he almost is like, you get the impression he's thinking about being merciful towards her uncle just because he wants to impress her. But then he realizes that's stupid. He's not going to do that. So, but there's just that moment of almost humanity there, which he clearly is like, I'm not going to let that get in the way.
Yeah.
Which is great, because usually he plays almost cartoonish characters, and in this, there is a little bit more depth to him. He's great though.
Yeah. Also the fact that, at no point does his character ever admit to the screen, to the other characters, or to himself that he's doing this for money. Like, the character never breaks character from being actually like vigilant for God's justice.
Yeah, it's true. It's like, if you want to try to understand his portrayal of Matthew Hopkins, you can only watch what he does, because there is no internalizing with that character at all. It's all on the surface. Whatever he's thinking about, his motivations, all that shit is just in there. You never know. You just have to gauge him by his actions on the screen, which is great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. John Stern was also a real person. He was actually Matthew Hopkins's fellow torture assistant. And the part where this movie breaks from reality is that Matthew Hopkins was not killed by a vengeful lover. He died pretty comfortably at home, and by comfortably at home, I mean like 17th century comfortably at home, which means he had some sort of like wasting disease that probably made him drown in fluids in his lungs. But he died at a relatively old age in a bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally drown in his own fecal matter.
Yeah.
Comfortably at home.
17th century comforts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should all be so 17th century lucky.
He was not there. There were a lot of folklore around the fact that he was drowned by being dunked into a river to see if he would float. That is not true. He just drowned in his own pus.
Yeah, it's just it's an old wives' tale. It's pretty much well known that he gorged himself on his own bodily fluids.
Yeah, he just couldn't stop drinking his own cum. So that is a 6 out of 10 Loathsome Things from us. It doesn't break the top 10, but it's good. And it's another entry into our little folk horror subset of things. I think this is our first Vengeance movie. I don't know. I don't keep track. But it's really good, and I'm excited to see what we'll review next.
Oh, me too. Absolutely.
If you are excited to see what we'll review next, you can influence that decision kind of by reaching out to us on Twitter and Instagram at Loathsome Pod, on Facebook at Loathsome Podcast, or you can email us at loathsomethings@gmail.com. Give us suggestions, give us praise. We love praise around here. Tell us what we got wrong. We just are suckers for that punishment too. And tell us what's good.
Tell us what's good. We didn't do it this time, but next time we're going to introduce a lovely feature, the motherfucking asshole of the episode.
Yeah, John, who would you say was the motherfucking asshole of this episode?
It's funny because, again, I was thinking about this. I mean, the obvious motherfucking asshole would be Matthew Hopkins. But then I thought about John Stern and what a motherfucking asshole he was. And then I went with Matthew Hopkins.
I mean, I think Matthew Hopkins is the motherfucking asshole, aka the most loathsome thing in this movie, because he does have like that care, but like he coercively rapes Sarah and then is cool to keep up that status quo, but then as soon as he finds out that Stern has raped her, he's kind of done with her.
Yeah, in a world of Sterns, one Matthew Hopkins becomes responsible for the death of hundreds.
Yeah, I don't think Stern could have done it without Hopkins.
No, he was too primal, wandering around, just occasionally murdering and raping people, which is terrible enough. Is a lot less dangerous than a guy like Hopkins, who is a Hitler type who ends up like organizing, the death of hundreds in this case, which is horrible.
Yeah.
And really just ultimately leads to you being a motherfucking asshole.
Motherfucking asshole. John, I just had a great idea for a horror TV series. It's called Stern and Hopkins, and it's like a police procedural, but it's two guys looking for witches.
Oh my God, that's so good. Oh, man. Oh,
it's a witch.
Stern and Hopkins?
Yep.
Wow.
Also, John, before we leave, we asked a question earlier in the podcast that I forgot about. It was, what's the Nate railing a kid in the skull with a beam of this movie?
That's right. I'm going to have to, I mean, of course I'm going to have to go with Dick axe slaughtering Matthew Hopkins.
Yep. It's a pretty good one. Also, him boot slamming out Stern's eyeball is a contender.
Yeah, the curb stomp prior to the axe slaughter was also genius.
Yeah, fantastic. I would say in a distant third place is the dunk of flame scene, which was woo, that was rough, but nothing really compares to old Dick Marshall chopping the fuck out of Hopkins.
The the penultimate moment in the film turned out to be the only moment in the film where I got really excited.
Yep. All right, folks, and that was Witchfinder General on yet another successful episode of Loathsome Things, a horror movie podcast.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'm sorry you all have to die.